Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Osborne Pro TV. My name is Rob. Today I'm going to be covering how to better secure RDP in your home or domain environment. Just to mention it here, in the domain environment, I'm not going to be covering how to set up an IPsec or SSH tunnel or an RDP gateway. This is just going to be securing RDP connections inside of your environment, not from outside in. So first we're starting with for the home user. What we're going to do is disable the to turn off remote desktop or RDP. We're going to disable the firewall rule and disable remote access. So if I were to issue this command here, what this does, a value of 0 actually allows access, a value of 1 denies access. So I need to issue that again. Now you will see if I open my View Advanced System Settings and then go to the Remote tab, what this did is check this box here, don't allow remote connections to this computer. If I change this value to 0, you will see that it does the opposite and allows those connections. So View Advanced System Settings, Remote, now it's allowed. Notice up here I have remote access, remote assistance. This is grayed out, as is this checkbox here, because I have that set through group policy. On your home computer, you'll be able to modify these. But what this is doing is you want to match these settings here. So allow remote assistance, prevent that. This is so attackers are not able to send custom messages to your users in your environment requesting remote access to their device. And also you want to check this box down here to ensure only computers on the same network are able to authenticate to each other before you're able to send credentials to that device. I'll cover that more when we get to the domain area on possible on what it can break communication with, but in your home environment or a small business, this is going to be fine 99% of the time. So the firewall rules, if we were to issue this command, what that affects is if I open my Windows Defender Firewall and then go to Advanced Settings, Inbound Rules, under the Remote area, we have Remote Desktop Shadow and User Mode for TCP and UDP. Now TCP and UDP is of course allowing both those protocols to be used over port 3389. And shadow, if you're not aware of what that is when there's a remote desktop session set up, an administrator can view what is going on inside that current session. Now you can restrict these firewall rules on your home environment or small business even more by simply double-clicking on one of the values here. And you can do things such as under scope, you can define the IP addresses that are allowed to have the remote connections. You can also define the users that are allowed that this firewall rule applies to, as well as remote computers this firewall rule applies to. And that is basically what you can do in the firewall there for refining things a little more. Also, if you notice under View Advanced System Settings in the Remote tab, we can also click the Select Users button down here. And what that does is allow us to add custom users who are allowed to remote into this device, giving them permissions. Now a user can be added to have remote desktop permissions, but if the computer is not on the same network, this network level authentication will fail and that user will never even be attempted to try to connect because the NLA is in the way first. That is basically the nutshell for home computers. I created also, these are a couple CIM commands here that do the opposite of what these commands do. So if what we could do here is, these are, as I mentioned before, disabling the, actually this needs to be 1. Now what these two commands do is disable RDP connections. We can enable them by changing this value to 0 and setting this to Disable-NetFirewallRule, or you can issue these CIM commands to do the same thing and require user authentication. You can also add users to the remote desktop users group, which is the same thing as that button that we were clicking with View users under View Advanced System Settings and Remote select users. This is another way to do that basically, because the remote desktop users group has RDP access permissions to the device. You can also set NLA using these commands, or network level authentication, which is simply the same as checking that box that I showed you there as well. That concludes the home section of this. Next, we're going to move on to the domain area. Now, when we configure a domain securely, one of the things that we're doing is ensuring that TLS 1.2 encryption is used. This is because by default, RDP uses its own RDP encryption, and this is considered weak and has flaws, and we want to use something that is more secure. So to set this up, we need certificates because it is TLS. So we go to Tools on our Certificate Authority, and then Certificate Authority. Under Certificate Templates, we would right-click and select Manage. And now we're going to click our computer certificate and duplicate it. So we would right-click, Duplicate Template. Leave the defaults under Compatibility. Under General, we'll call this RDP. And we're going to publish to Active Directory. Under Request Handling, we're going to make sure the private key is not exportable, so leave that unchecked. Cryptography, leave our key at 2048. For security, I'm going to remove my user account, rely only on groups. For domain computers, we want to have enroll and auto-enroll permissions. We're also going to add our domain controllers here, and we're going to give them enroll and auto-enroll permissions as well. The other thing we need to do here, first we'll mention with subject name, if you leave this name blank, there won't be any certificate issues as long as it's trusted, where you can use any name you want to connect to the device or an IP address. We're going to select DNS name to use that and leave DNS name selected here. And this is going to force the use of that DNS name for trusted certificate connection. Then we would go to, where are we here? Extensions. Sorry, I couldn't find it. So extensions, we have application policies selected. We click edit. We need to remove both of these, and we're going to create our own here. So we click the add button, and then we click new. We're going to call this remote desktop authentication. And then what this needs to be is this value here. So the object identifier is 1.3.6.1.4.1.311.54.1.2. And that, of course, is remote desktop authentication. I have this added already. So once you've added it, select it here and click OK. And now we can use the certificate for authenticating remote desktop sessions. So we click OK. Notice that's the only value here under application policies. And our certificate template is now ready to go. So I click OK. And now I can close out this certificate templates console window and go back to my certificate authority window here. I right click on certificate templates, select new certificate template to issue, select the cert I just created, which is called RDP, and click OK. And you'll notice I have one that I created already for this environment called Remote Desktop Computer. This is just another one I created with the same values set. So now that we've added that certificate here, we are going to move over to our domain controller and cover the group policy. So we go to Tools, Group Policy Management. The first GPO we're going to create is called NLA, or Network Level Authentication. We're only going to set one group policy value on this, and this is so that we ensure we're not breaking communication with any of our devices when this gets applied. Anything in a DMZ or a demilitarized zone, which is basically the area between, that's an area that's open to the public internet and to the local domain. We want to ensure any computers inside that DMZ do not have this policy applied because it could break communication. It's a good idea to test out NLA wherever you can first. It's inside an environment, it of course will work, but anything outside, test it first by setting the value manually to ensure nothing gets broken. So with this policy created, if you don't already know, select Group Policy Objects, right-click and go to New, create your NLA policy. Now we're going to edit it and go to Computer Configuration, Policies, Administrative Templates, Windows Components, Remote Desktop Services, Remote Desktop Session Host, Security, and make this bigger. We want to select Require User Authentication for Remote Connections by using NLA. And as you can see, I have this policy enabled. So that's the only setting we're going to define there. With a radius group policy I have set up here, I currently have PKI certificates for computers being pushed out automatically. That is done, just to mention it, in case it's not already set up in your environment, through, where are we here? For one, I have the public key infrastructure certificates being trusted. And also I have auto-enrollment settings configured. So automatic certificate enrollment is covered under public key policies, certificate services client auto-enrollment settings. And we have that, of course, enabled so that the computers can trust these certs. And I also have a PKI certificate group policy setting. And this is what pushes the root CA of my domain into the trusted root certificate authorities and trusted intermediate certificate authorities. So with all those certificates trusted and being assigned automatically, we have our RDP certificate should be going out as soon as a group policy update happens. So here, if I do GP update /force, I'm going to do the same thing on this. And GP update -force. And now you'll see my computer policy is updated. And if I go to CertLM, which is the local machine store, I go to personal certificates, and I should see my RDP certificate here. So now it's been assigned. And same thing for my CA here, which is the one we just created, is the RDP template there. And you can see this one has that as well. So now that they have the certificates, that's great, but we need to configure the computers in our environment to use RDP securely and enable it in the first place. So if we right-click Group Policy Objects, select New, and create a policy called Settings RDP. The first thing we're going to cover here is we go to Computer Configuration, Policies, first Windows Settings, Security Settings, and we're going to configure System Services and have remote desktop services. We're going to set that to automatic. This way the RDP service is starting up automatically whenever the computer starts. Leave the default security, which I believe is network service, is what's running the service, so leave that at the default. And that's going to cover that part of it. The next thing we're going to do is Computer Configuration, Policies, Administrative Templates, System, Remote Assistance. And notice here I have Configure Solicited Remote Assistance and Configure Offer Remote Assistance, both to disabled. And the reason for that is because that is what I covered earlier under View Advanced System Settings. Under Remote, we want this remote assistance box unchecked so that attackers can offer users with a special customized message offering to remote into their computer because they need to do something for whatever reason. That's what we're doing here. So now that we have those settings configured, the next thing we're going to go do is Computer Configuration, Policies, Administrative Templates, Windows Components, and then Remote Desktop Services. Then under Remote Desktop Session Host, we have a few of these. There's settings in a few of these that we need to set. So first we'll start at the bottom here with temporary folders. And what we're doing here is ensuring a temporary folder is created for each session and that it gets deleted upon exit of that session. This way we're not saving any unnecessary information or possibly anything that could be that we don't want getting out or being available for someone to access. So have both of these settings disabled. And let me expand this side a little more. Also under Remote Desktop Session Host, we want to, next we'll go to Security since that's our next thing up. And we have Server Authentication Certificate Template. Now, Remote Desktop Computer is the one I set before. Right now I'm going to set it to RDP because that's the one I created while doing this video. And if you don't know what yours is called, you can go to your certificate authority, select certificate templates, and you get your name from here, RDP. So RDP. Now I click OK. That's going to be my new cert that's getting used. And let me just force an update to allow that change to go through. And I'll do the same thing over here real quick. Okay. So the next thing we're doing here is we're setting our client connection encryption level. We want this to be at a high level to ensure that TLS 1.2 is used and that there won't be any kind of downgrade attacks that can be performed, basically. The next thing we're going to do is always prompt for password upon connection. We definitely want to enable that. This way users are forced to enter a password every time. We don't want them saving a password anywhere for their remote sessions because that can be accessed by an attacker, and if a machine is compromised, we don't want the password being given up. Require secure RPC communication. We want to enable this. This ensures that any RPC communication with the clients is encrypted and authenticated. Require use of a specific security level for security layer for RDP connections. SSL is referring, of course, in our case, with highest encryption set to TLS 1.2. We want SSL selected because the default is RDP, and that's been found to have weaknesses in it, basically. So we want to use SSL. What that does is anytime an RDP session is set up, it will be done so inside of a TLS 1.2 tunnel. So back to, now that we have all our security settings there set, we want to go to Remote Desktop Session Host. And if we go to Connections, we can allow users to connect remotely by using Remote Desktop Services. We definitely want to enable this because that is this setting here under View, Advanced System Settings, Remote, and that's what we're setting with this value, allow remote connections to this computer. The other thing we have set rules for remote control of Remote Desktop Services user sessions. We want this to be full control without users' permissions, and this is so administrators can interact with the user's RDP session. And they can do this without, you can set this however you like, of course. However, the CIS benchmarks, I believe, recommend setting this value. Maybe an attacker has a remote session and you need to interrupt that for whatever reason. Maybe the thinking there. So, I believe I covered everything under group policy. Let me just expand all these to make sure I did not cover the firewall rules or that. Okay, so let me go back to edit. Next thing we need to do is computer configuration, policies, Windows settings, security settings, and kind of in a drop down area over here on the left hand side pane. We want to drop down Windows Defender Firewall with advanced security, inbound rules, and notice I have the 3 firewall rules set. And here, in case you skipped over the home computer section, you can narrow things down more by defining a scope of allowed devices. You can define remote computers and remote users this applies to, just to tighten things up a little more if desired. To add those rules, simply right-click on Inbound Rule, New Rule, and then we will go to Predefined, scroll down to Remote Desktop, and then we click Next. Notice these are those 3 that exist already. We would click Next and it would add them into here, and then you can define them however you want after they're added. The next thing we're going to do is go to computer configuration again, only this time policies, administrative templates, network connections, Windows Defender Firewall, domain profile, And here what we're doing is allowing inbound remote desktop exceptions, and we can define an IP address that is allowed to make these remote desktop connections. So you can use a wildcard here just to allow everything, or if maybe you have 10.0.0.0/16 environment you want to allow, or something along those lines, you can define specific IP addresses. The benefit to this is, just an extra layer of restriction. So you don't have to defend or define those individual firewall rules. You can also just set this one, because this is going to be set up in your Windows Defender firewall as well. Those other firewall rules, in case what I said could be interpreted different than how I meant, you still need to set up those firewall rules to allow the remote desktop connections. This is just a way of restricting it more, is what we were doing. So now that we've done all that, I'm making sure we covered remote assistance and the security settings and the temporary folders. Okay, good. So with all that going on, our certificate should get pushed out automatically as long as we have the correct configurations, as I've shown earlier. And as you saw with our cert local machine, that the RDP certificate did get pushed out. In group policy, we set it up so that this RDP certificate has to get used. Another thing I mentioned here, if you desire, you can also change certificates manually. So what we're doing here is this command. You'll have to do this through PowerShell to assign the certificate manually. Really, I called this thumbprint, but I shouldn't have. I should call this SHA hash. And what this is doing is we can manually assign the certificate if we think that it's not being used, or an incorrect one is being used, or maybe somebody has two remote certs and we want to ensure ours is assigned. We would do this command to assign our specified certificate. So with that defined, what I'm going to show now is we have our group policy is all set up. We have everything that we need. So right now what we're going to do is I'm going to start up packet capture with Wireshark. And I'm going to capture on my Ethernet adapter, and we only want to capture TCP.port equals 3389 equals 3389. Now, if I set up a remote connection, or actually, it doesn't matter which way I go, but we're going to see a TLS tunnel is built. So I'll start from here first. We remote into my certificate authority, click connect. Oops, and now if I enter my password to sign in, we can see I've remoted in successfully to the device. And over here we can see, I'll stop the capture for now, on port 3389, which is the default RDP port, that we have a TLS tunnel built. We have a client hello, server hello, and a key exchange, and we can see that TLS is being used for this communication, encrypting it, preventing any listeners from seeing what's going on. So that is all fine and dandy. If we were to come in the other way, we can also see that the same thing would happen. We would just see that TLS connection established, and that would be that. So that is how to securely set up RDP in a domain and home environment. Leave your comments or questions in the comments of this video, and I do love subscribers, so feel free to subscribe. Thanks for watching.